Hello, this is Vijay Rana from London. With me today is Dr. Lavanya Vemsani. She is the professor of history in the Department of Social Sciences at Shawnee State University, Portsmouth, Ohio. She is an award-winning scholar and professor of history specializing in history and religions. She holds 2 doctorates, one in the religious studies from the McMaster University and the other in history from the University of Hyderabad. Her books include Modern Hinduism in Text and Context, Krishna in History, Thought and Culture. It's in fact the Encyclopedia of Lord Krishna. Hindu and Jain Mythology of Balarama. She's also the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Indic Studies. Professor Lavanya Vemsani, welcome to the program. Let's begin with Indus Valley Civilization. What do we know about the origins of these people and how come they managed to build mega cities and urban centers?
Indus Valley is the largest civilization. We only see the large buildings, but evidence shows us it has been a long time in the making. The earliest Neolithic, village settlements are also found in that area. Mehergarh, in fact, is the oldest Indus Valley village settlement. So early agricultural development is also seen in that area. Of course, around the same time in South India also we see metal implements and development of agriculture. So what we come across, if we see the big picture, if we are focusing on only one area, of course, we're going to miss the big picture. But what the big picture shows us is there is continuous living settlements in India from 80,000 years ago. And in different areas, they developed into different styled civilizations. We just talked about it. In northwestern India, in Indus Valley, there is development of agriculture and foundation of villages and then cities. And in southern India, it's a little bit different. Of course, agriculture, foundations, Neolithic settlement is found along with metallurgy. Little bit different type of style of buildings. But recently, Keeladi, one of the South Indian cities, was also excavated. So what I would like to say is, early settlements continued into early cities. They evolved into early cities in many areas. So what we can say is, India is home to one of the earliest civilizations, beginning with 80,000 years ago. Of course, 7 million years ago, we have Paleolithic. But from 80,000 years ago onwards, it's anatomically modern humans and a continuous evolution of settlements, Neolithic settlements and then urban settlements. And Harappa is one of them. The Indus Valley civilization is one of them. One of the civilizations that evolved out of these early populations that settled in India. And the later phase of Harappa. Harappa, of course, we have the Indus Valley, very extensive civilization from 10,000 BCE. But from 3000 BCE onwards, we have these large developed cities. That's what is called developed Harappa, developed Indus civilization. Around the same phase, we also have the Vedic texts. And Vedic texts also talk about the same geographical area that we find the Indus Valley towns and cities. So this had been controversial because one of them is archaeological evidence and one of them is textual evidence. Initially, it was thought the textual evidence people are different and the city people are different, and they both had a war and that kind of constructed theory, I would say. But evidence is lacking for it. If somebody came over and took over these cities, there should be large destruction, large mounds of skeletons, large weapons, and as soon as the cities are destroyed, right over them, a new style of cities should be built by the newcomers, the invaders. that hadn't happened. That did not happen either in the Indus Valley cities. That did not happen in India anywhere. So the invasion is, our occupation is out of question. And the texts, the Vedic texts, do not talk about any invasions or any destruction of the cities. And the theory that was developed is actually based on an artificial construction of a race, Aryan. Aryan is not actually a race. It's actually used as an adjective or adverb in sometimes and in some parts of the book, but it was never used as a noun. It's not a race. It's not denoting a race. So the idea that the people that had the books were different and they were a different race and they took over the well-constructed cities and populations and destroyed them is not tenable with the available evidence.
How far it extended from north to south and from west to east?
So towards the east, it went all the way to Haryana and a little bit in UP, and in the south, direct evidence all the way up to Narmada Valley. Nauda told a lot of evidence, but in southern river valleys, for example, Krishna and even Kaveri Delta had Harappan pottery. So we cannot say that it is limited to a small geographical area as we thought before. Initially, we thought it was only in the area of Indus River, but it extends to a far larger area. It goes all the way from Turkmenistan to Narmada River Valley directly and indirectly much further. Yeah. Because of the pottery and all that.
This is really interesting. So how far it is right to call it Indus Valley Civilization? I know some people have tried to call it Indus Saraswati Civilization, about which there's a lot of controversy. So is it right to just call it as Indus Valley Civilization, particularly when we know that less than 40% sites are in around Indus Valley? So what should be its name?
Right, yeah, that's a dilemma, right? But we found the first sites and well-developed sites, mature Harappan sites in the Indus Valley area. So I favor calling it, Indus Valley or Sindhu Saraswati civilization, because the nucleus is there. Of course, there are other areas, but the early Neolithic settlements and early foundations are there. So I like calling it Sindhu Saraswati or Indus Valley. Yeah.
Though you mentioned it slightly earlier about its demise, but let me put it separately and ask you a separate question. Until now, historians have been telling us various things about its demise. Firstly, they said it was destroyed by Aryans. Then they said there were some ecological factors that were responsible. But when we see that there was hardly any demise because it was always expanding and growing. So how come this clean break came between Indus Valley civilization and Aryan civilizations?
Yeah. There is no break. That's the point. That there was no demise of the civilization. There is only a shift. There is a move. Cultures move from one place to the other place. In Indus Valley also, we see the same phenomena. It was not, there was no demise, but there was a movement. Of course, as there was movement, there was shift. Of course, there is also adaptation. They built a different style of cities. They developed a different style of things. That doesn't mean that they gave up their original symbols. They still continued their original symbols, original things that they carried with them. That's the reason we find their pottery even in later megalithic times, right? Their pottery survived until 5th century BCE means their culture survived. Somehow they survived, right? It's not that somebody preserved their pottery until 5th century BC and then left it in their grandpa's grave, right? So the point that the pottery survived and the pottery was left in a megalithic grave, that the culture and the people who carried them also survived and lived up to that time. For whatever reason, they may have changed their pottery later on. After 5th century, we have a different style of empire building and all this. But the point is, I don't think there was any demise and then there was any new civilization or any kind of sudden change. I think it's a continuous and gradual change and continuous and gradual shift. So cultural shifts and civilizational shifts are natural in a large geographical area. That doesn't mean that one culture ended and another culture is founded.
Is there a likelihood that, like the later history of India, those who arrived from Central Asia, call them Aryans if you like, were they assimilated or absorbed in the towns like Rakhigadi, Sanoli, and Dholavira, where all these Central Asian immigrants and the original inhabitants of Indus Valley lived side by side and together? Was that a possibility?
I actually don't like this word Aryan. We should get rid of it from all our textbooks, all the books. Race is an artificial construct, and race of Aryans is even more an artificial construct. It's an identity building exercise during the imperialism and during colonialism. And it's important to take this out of the books from everywhere. It has done a lot of damage to humanity. The Aryan race theory and the Aryan identity and the special imposition of this theory has done a lot of damage. So in colonial era, identity building and invaders being, the culture bringers is a theory. And that was used to build societies. It was used in all colonized societies. All colonized societies still struggle with finding their true identity. Yemen, many of these countries and African countries. The invaders always come from north. They're always tall and always lighter skinned. This has done a lot of damage to the colonized societies. They're still struggling to find their identity, and especially many African nations. Of course, India found some peace, but African nations, Rwanda, we have heard this race struggle and civil war. So this type of artificial race constructions, artificial theories, artificial names are used by colonial imperialist governments. There is no race, no invaders into India. India as a civilizational zone existed between the Turkmenistan as well as the Narmada Valley directly. All that is a Harappan civilization. Very similar settlements and similar cities were also excavated up to Narmada Valley. The dates might be different, the spread might be different. So how can it be an invader or an outsider civilization? It's an Indian subcontinental civilization. Of course, it's a Bronze and Chalcolithic based civilization. And in southern subcontinent, we have iron based and Neolithic civilization. The civilizational style is a little bit different, but they shared their culture. The reason that the different pottery is found in different sites, Harappan pottery is found in southern sites, and southern graveware and other pottery is found in northern sites, as well as copper tools found in different places, shows that they are mutually coexistent, mutually beneficial societies, not warring societies, not invading and fighting societies. Invading and fighting societies are built when there is a resource crunch. This happened mostly in West Asian and Middle Eastern societies. Even in ancient Mesopotamia, the warring societies were very common. The fortifications and wars were very common. But Indian subcontinent, Africa, they are mutually beneficial societies, which had resource-rich regions, which were in resource-rich regions. So, of course, there might be smaller wars, smaller struggles. I would not rule that out for any society. But large wars as well as large occupations is very rare for ancient India. So, so this theory of Aryans coming into India and defeating many of the tribes or existing native societies is not tenable. Where are the weapons? If somebody came and defeated, there should be weapons, there should be destruction, and there should be mass graves. So nothing of that sort is excavated in any place. So Indian culture is actually understood very differently than what it was in the ground. We have to focus on the ground, examine the evidence on the ground, and then formulate our own frameworks. Indian history was understood from a framework that is formulated outside. So Indian history was not clearly understood.
Was it not understood or was it intentional? Why a set of historians is still adamant not to change their viewpoint?
Archaeologists have written about it, especially South Indian archaeologists have written about it. How Neolithic and megalithic societies coexisted and how they have shared, and how nomadic societies as well as settled societies coexisted. How nomadic societies actually cooperated with the settled societies in the market economy and how the markets functioned. But I think it's taking time for all this to get into the books. There is no real clear-cut urbanization and then destruction of urbanization and then ruralization, then urbanization. It does not go like that based on the evidence that we have now. Maybe previous evidence was not enough for them, but previous evidence, they based only on two cities, the Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. But we have more cities now. Most of these cities are surrounded by these waterworks. Of course, if you look at Dholavira, has water and all this and farms all around. So we know they coexisted. And later examples also show us, even the 9th century, 10th century, even 6th century megalithic also has Neolithic continuation. So nomadic societies, settled societies, cities, and urban centers, we see them coexisting within each other. And even in 19th century, many of our cities had farms within the cities. There is no clear division between the rural and the urban life. It's the urbanization, the urbanism in Indian subcontinent is much different than it was visualized in the north, or it's in the west. And another thing about Indian society is we also do not have a clear division between agricultural production as well as the secondary production. Of course, agricultural production is there, but when the agriculture was not in season, they also produced other things that were necessary for the society. And societies also functioned with many of the production activities that happened within the household. And another thing is Indian society, of course, they built the cities, but the cities are not fortified cities. And the cities did not focus on building large fortifications or large palaces. There might be housing, there might be different things, but the focus is not building on these large palaces. The public buildings are always institutions or temples or a different type of buildings. So if we are looking for urban centers the way we see them now, with a mall and with a center, with administrative center, we're not going to find that in ancient India.
Mhm.
The ancient Indian settlements are a little bit different.
Mhm. And besides, some of the cities are quite continuously inhabited since then, and so
And we cannot excavate them.
you cannot excavate them, as was seen in Sanoli, because there's a village just next door and you can't excavate there. Yet, my question is that the entire emphasis of history writing in India has been about difference and diversity, and somehow this continuity and continuum is being denied. Why is that?
Right. That is the question. The cities mentioned, but many cannot be excavated because they are continuously occupied. They rebuilt over the city again. So it's difficult to excavate many of the cities. We read about them, and the focus is also not on building these big administrative center, big palaces. The focus is on building public buildings. Mauryan cities, we heard them, but Mauryan cities also about building public buildings, the stupas, the chaityas, the other buildings. The city and the city layout, of course, is overtaken by the later constructions, and whatever remained is very little. So it's very difficult to imagine the actual city constructions. Actual urban constructions. And as the urbanism, the idea of urbanism in India is different. There is no clear-cut division between the rural and urban. The farms are also within the urban centers. So it's difficult to know. Of course, there are huge, big urban centers, large markets, and we read them in the books, we know them, they existed. We also see evidence of them in archaeology, but we cannot fully excavate them. We cannot see full extent of these cities. That's one of the reasons I would say the confusion is. Mm-hmm. If there is a big Chaitya house, big Mahastupa, and there should be a large city close to it. If there is an institution there to support it, there should be an urban center, there should be a large support center and support system, definitely. Mm-hmm. But we see these stupas, we see these Chaitya Gruhas, we see these buildings that survived, but many other things did not survive. But it tells us that these things existed. Mm-hmm. But there is an opposition to accepting this. They accept that, the historians accept that there are vibrant centers of learning, vibrant centers of markets and all this, and it was also attested by foreign visitors. It's not only that Indian texts are telling about it, it's also attested by foreign visitors who visited India. However, there is still a concern among the historians to accept the fact as it is, because they don't see the actual buildings. They see the chaityas, they see the institutions, they see the stupas, but don't see the actual buildings of the settlements. Mm-hmm. They may have been there, but other cities were built over it, because these are continuous settlements, continuous habitations. We are still living in these places, the Vaishali and all these. They're not abandoned cities. Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, they were abandoned for whatever reason, because maybe the environment was not good, maybe it was flooding often. So we know we can excavate them because they were left out. But if they are continuously occupied, there is no way we can excavate them. We can excavate only a section of them, which gives us only a partial view.
Exactly. I'm talking of Varanasi. They have now done some excavations that say that the city, that brings back to the city up to 800 BC.
Right.
But then they couldn't excavate beyond what they have done near Rajghat, that is on the outskirts of Banaras. Right. Now, coming to this new DNA research, they say that they are clearly rewriting the Indian history. This is what the claim is. So could you explain what have they found in this new genetic research?
Yes. Before 2006, there were these assumptions. They thought the modern genetic pool, if it is examined, might show invasion, might show these caste divisions. When they really examined the DNA, it actually showed the oldest genetic heritage in India, and it also showed the continuous genetic heritage in India. So for male, I'll go with male and female separately, and then we'll talk about the prehistory and how it goes with it. So for female DNA, it is simple and continuous. African lines, there are two foundation events. So the first foundation event is the Homo sapiens. They're known by different names in different regions. Neanderthals, Australopithecine, and India, Shiopithecus and Ramapithecus in different names. South India known as Shiopithecus, North India known as Australopithecus. That is the first foundation event. The second foundation event is anatomically modern humans. They are called Homo sapiens sapiens. So this event records from 80,000 years ago in India, Africa a little bit further. But lines are different. The African foundational event is older, and African lines are different. The modern humans in Africa trace their genetic lines. For females, they trace them to L. Males, they trace them to A and B. So those are the African foundations. And then, of course, after a lot of gap, the foundations are seen in India. So India is actually called the founder zone, or the first zone of settlement after Africa. So the anatomically modern humans, the skeletons are found from 80,000 years ago. Not skeletons, the genetic evidence, our genetic evidence, traces back to about 73,000 years ago. Of course, the evidence from 80,000, but 73,000 years ago. So the female genetic evidence goes to 74,000 years ago. And the first line, the oldest line of female, non-African female, is known as M clade. So the M is in India. And then the M clade gives rise to a number of M's. So 60% of Indians have this M-derived lines. And then M gives rise to N, and about 5 to 10% of Indians have this N lines. And N gives rise to R. R is the most recent. It traces back to 16,000 years ago, while N traces back to 50,000 years ago. So the N as actually found in India in a number of U lines. So U1, U2, U3, U4, UI, many lines. Most recent one is found in Punjab. So the U lines are found not just in our female heritage of India, it is also found in Rakhigarhi skeleton. The Rakhigarhi skeleton is a female skeleton. It actually showed U2B2. It is Indian specific female line. These lines are not found anywhere. These are found among 5 to 10% of Indian population. It's found not just in one area. It's found all across India. So all these genetic lines are mixed all across India. And there is no caste difference and there is no tribe difference. And this U line is actually found in about 15% of caste populations and about 8% of tribal populations. So female genetic lines, of course, origin in India and found among every population in different various percentages. And of course, it's also found in Rakhigarhi. So we have a continuity with it. So the modern DNA as well as ancient DNA matches. Right? Because we know M is the original oldest one. And then we have N. And then we have R. R is represented by these modern lines that are traced back to 16,000 years ago from the populations. And it is also found in Rakhigarhi DNA, which is traced back to, I think, maybe Harappan history, probably 6,000 or 3,000 years. So there is a continuity in females' genetic heritage. Similarly, male genetic heritage also shows continuity. African lines, A and B. Then the next line, next genetic heritage is C. C is actually found in India. And C is also dated to about 73,000 years ago in India. And then we have other lines derived from it. Of course, C, D, F, and all these other lines. C is commonly found, and D is found in Eastern India and Northern Nepalese and the Eastern, and D also gives rise to O, that is found in Eastern, Southeast Asia, East Asia, etc. most commonly. And F gives rise to a lot of mutations. And that leads to K, P, and all these. One of the mutations gives rise to R, and R is the most commonly found lines in the world. So the mutation that gave rise to R is found in India. And the original R is also oldest in India. It dates to 50,000. And then the derivative lines, R1, R2, R1A, R1B, and many kinds of them are found. Of course, found in India. There is a lot of variety in India, and then deep-rooted in India. So in India, this R1 is also dated to about 36,000 years ago. And R is dated to, I think, about 50,000 years ago. And in Europe, it only dates to 30,000 to 23,000 years ago.
They have been saying all along that this R1A is from Central Asia and Europe. Is that not correct? Or
how can it be correct?
So
if the original C is here and F is here and F derived lines are here, and if the mutation is here that gave rise to R, and the R is oldest here, you tell me, how can the youngest be giving rise to the oldest? So if R is here, how can R1 be coming from, somewhere else? R actually gave rise to a number of R1, R2, R everything. And the mutation is here and R is here. So how does this happen?
So then comes this linguistic, controversy. Did Sanskrit originate in India?
I would think so. It's the oldest language in India, and I really think it originated in India because the words, of course, they talk about this word roots and word morphology and all that. So the words are in India. Sanskrit words are found in every Indian language, whatever the language might be. And before 10th century, most of our languages, and some of them evolved, after 14th century. Most of the South Indian languages like Telugu and all these evolved into written languages only from, later, not really early. But they contain, of course, 80-90% of Sanskrit words, Sanskrit root words. So if Sanskrit is not an Indian language, how can all Indian languages be using Sanskrit words? And how can they all have Sanskrit root words? Whatever the language may be, even South Indian languages, Tamil, Malayalam, and Kannada, Telugu, all of them have Sanskrit words. And of course, North Indian languages, we know a lot of Sanskrit words. So I really don't understand, there is a 50% similarity between the European languages and Sanskrit, but they are considered affiliated languages.
Mhm.
And South Indian languages have more than 60% similarity and shared words, but they are considered a different language family. Of course, many East Asian nations like China and many of these nations actually argued against this language morphology, because the language morphology doesn't really apply much to the Asian languages. It actually confuses the origin of Asian languages. So there are many linguists in Asia that argue against this language morphology. It's for the linguists to decide. What I can say is there is more to think here. And there must be caution in calling a language as race. Because race itself is an artificial construct. There is no race in this world. And trying to decide race based on a language is too rudimentary. This is 21st century. We should not be doing that. Racial language and linguistic theories is a maybe maybe okay for 19th century or 18th century, but not okay for 21st century.
So this brings me to our basic question. What is happening with the Indian history? All these artificial divides, North versus South, Aryan versus Dravid, Indus versus Aryan civilization, Sanskrit, whether it's native or foreign. So why this has been done for all along, and despite all this evidence which we have now uncovered,
Right.
why there's this reluctance to update the knowledge?
Right. That's so sad, right? It's the saddest thing ever to happen in any history in the world. The language that is used by almost 90% of the people, not directly but indirectly, all the languages that are used in India use Sanskrit words. So on an everyday basis, 90% of the population uses Sanskrit root words. And still we call it, an outside language. How?
Mhm.
And
So,
then how is this division possible? This division that was not seen in ancient history, in classical history, even in 10th century history, the emperors from the south wanted to unite all of India and conquer the north. The emperors from the north wanted to conquer the south and unite all of India. The vision of India as one unit is in the historical conscious. The first step is to talk about our foundations and develop new frameworks. So the first thing is we have to get rid of the imperial race theories, the Aryan race, and then invasions, and then examining Indian history from the northwestern axis. There is no axis in Indian history. Indian history shifted. There were cultural shifts and civilizational shifts within India, and mutual cooperation and mutual existence between civilizational groups within the Indian subcontinent. So we have to give up this framework. This framework has bound Indian history on an artificial frame. We have to give that up. We have to give that examining from a fixed axis, examining from a race invasion or later invasions. These 2 points have to be taken out of Indian history. Then we have to discuss these foundations. What are the original foundations? What is our ground evidence from 80,000 years ago, our prehistory. What was our prehistory? We have a lot of evidence. The Bhimbetka caves and all these early prehistory, it actually shows our continuous occupation from upper Paleolithic period, from 80,000 years ago. And 80,000 years ago is our genetic heritage also. Of course, we have a calamity, the natural calamity, the Toba volcano, and then, 74,000 years ago. So we lost. Anyway, our upper Paleolithic tools are actually found in this volcanic ash. So we know the genetic heritage as well as, the civilization was lost. But from 74,000 years ago, we have continuity. From there on, we have these Bhimbetka caves and many other places, of course, gave early evidence of upper Paleolithic settlement. And for Mesolithic settlement, we have even more evidence. And then Neolithic and Chalcolithic, Bronze Age. Of course, Bronze, we just discussed Bronze and Chalcolithic settlements, the Harappa and Neolithic and Megalithic. They're not isolated civilizations. We should not see them as regionalist, isolated civilizations. Harappa is not just in Harappa and Northwest. It's found across India, because they traded and they mutually benefited each other. So different civilization groups existed. Maybe the lifestyles are different, but existed together. And we see this same continuity within history. So we have to bring this new framework, the understanding of cultural shifts, the understanding of mutually coexisting civilizations into our history. That will help us understand our history. As long as we continue this invader and colonizer frameworks, it's not going to help us.
So thank you very much indeed, Professor Lavanya Vemsani. Thank you.
Thank you so much.